Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session, Literacy Coaching as a Means of Transformative Teaching. I'm Dan Bordwell,
And I'm Jody Baker.
and with our colleagues Julie Scullin, Jalen Giles, Jeremy Parker, Kim Allen, and Jenny Jones, we are presenting on the work that we're doing in the Anoka Hennepin School District.
So our purpose for this work is to share how we have structured and grown as a literacy team. We've been working in social studies, ELA, and now science and reading teachers as a literacy team with literacy coaches. We want to share our data, our stories, and examples of the transformative teaching that has happened through evidence-based literacy practices. Obviously, this virtual session is not how we intended to have this session, so we are bringing in as many voices who have been part of this process as possible. Our contact information will be available at the end, so please contact us if you want further information.
So, to set some context, we'll just talk a little bit about our district first and foremost. We are just north of Minneapolis, where we have 5 traditional high schools, 6 middle schools, 26 elementary schools, and a number of other sites. We have just under 38,000 students, and about 6 in 10 are white, and 30% are free and reduced lunch, 10% special ed, and 7% EL, with other demographic information right there.
So the way our literacy team works together is we currently call ourselves the literacy team at the district level, but we started out as Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy. The acronym for that is CIRCLE. And the coaches are embedded within the high school buildings. I'm one of the coaches at one of our buildings. We have building administrators who are liaisons between the district and the buildings. We have teaching and learning specialists like Dan, and we have our director of curriculum involved. So to start out and tell us a little bit of background and history, this is Julie Scullin. She's our teaching and learning specialist for secondary literacy.
We had dabbled in literacy coaching at the secondary level for a few years, beginning with just middle school ELA teachers, then expanding to high school English teachers, and then to other content areas. As often happens in a district as the size of ours, we had a district leadership change, and exciting new ideas and initiatives took priority, and we lost funding for our literacy coaches. But the seeds of literacy coaching in content areas had been sown. So a colleague and I, a number of years later, started what we called the Social Studies Literacy Project in an effort to infuse literacy into a very traditional lecture packet heavy curriculum in social studies. We provided some one-shot professional development to teachers, but helping them to make that leap from the PD into classroom practice was a complicated struggle. Then the Circle Grant opportunity came across my desk, Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy. It was a federally funded grant, but it was being administered through the Minnesota Department of Ed. It was a very lengthy application process. We spent about a month writing and revising our proposal. We used a humanities approach with both ELA and social studies. The process involved almost all of our district leadership and staff in all departments. We wanted our coaches to ensure that all students would see instruction in effective practices in literacy in both English and social studies, 2 required courses, so twice a day. And we wanted a coach in each of our high schools. However, there was only funding for 3 in each grant application, so we were willing to settle for at least the 3 we could get. We were successful in our grant bid, and our first year was successful enough that the Minnesota Department of Ed provided us with funding for an additional coach our second year, and we've expanded since then.
So the model that we're using is a student-centered ecosystem that drives the inquiry. The coaches are involved in multiple interactions with teachers, from book studies to individual PD to PD at the department and building level and the district level to working with PLCs at the building level. And all of this is cyclical. So, for instance, a coach could have an individual conversation with the teacher and then follow it up with observations in their classroom. Or we could have a PLC or department meeting, and then an individual teacher could follow up with the coach. So, we're constantly taking data from the teachers and from our observations, reflecting on that and seeing what kind of PD, what kind of additional work would make sense. So next we're going to hear from Kim Allen, who's the Director of Secondary Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and she's going to talk a little bit about how this work is a way of differentiating PD.
Coaching is perhaps the best example of differentiating professional development. Not only is it absolutely tailored to the needs of the individual, it can be delivered at the time the teacher needs it most. Coaching isn't dependent on a standalone professional development schedule. The relationship between the coach and the teacher is directly related to the accountability and engagement. After all, it's pretty difficult to not be engaged in a one-on-one situation. Coaching has truly emerged as one of the most impactful means of delivering professional development, so much so that our district uses the coaching model in multiple departments and as part of our performance appraisal system known as QComp in Minnesota. Coaching is perhaps the best example.
So coaching is so great. Kim had to say it twice for us. We're not going to read these for you, but our work is centered around evidence-based literacy practices that are supported by data that show statistically significant growth for all types of students. So the Minnesota Department of Education, as part of their Circle grant proposal to receive federal funds, came up with 10 circle or evidence-based practices that we use when we are doing walkthroughs, when we're working with teachers, to guide the work that we're doing. And that work is instructional coaching, literacy, and equity. So the rest of our presentation, we're going to kind of interweave and mesh some theory, some research for these three components, as well as voices and data that we've seen having the literacy program in our buildings.
So we're going to start with research on instructional coaching. Elena Aguilar is known as just a dynamic leader of coaches, and these are some ideas she has. Coaching provides a collaborative environment, and it leads to lasting change because the coach is embedded in the building. It also brings out the best in people. The Annenberg Institute looked at coaching and has these things to say about it. It blends effective PD, but it also then takes into account what the school needs. And it's integral for school-wide improvement. You've got to have a coach in there because that makes such a difference. There's an interrelated approach with this coherent, focused alignment and all different levels of the system within the district and within the building where coaches are part of that. And Jim Knight, who, if you know anything about coaching, you know Jim Knight's name. He talks about coaching providing intensive, focused professional learning. So it's very focused on the individual. It's embedded, again, with continuous support for what those teachers actually need. And a huge part of coaching is relationships. So this is an ongoing relationship because the coach is actually in the building with the teachers. And with very highly skilled coaches, they work with the teachers so that the teacher is actually doing the thinking. So in some of our surveys, we asked our teachers, how has the collaboration been helpful to you? I'll let you read these too, but I'll jot through them quickly. You've been an amazing resource for ideas and support in changing my curriculum to better involve students. The last 2 years have been incredibly transformative for me. I'm confident it's because of your role and your work with us individually. You help me keep students' needs at the forefront and always help me identify what it is I'm trying to do and why. Working with you has been the best professional development I've had in years. Thank you. That's a comment we get often. This is the best PD I've ever had because it's so individualized. And coaches share resources and feedback and suggestions, great conversations, helpful dialogue, and leadership. So these are straight from comments from our teachers.
And had we been in person, we would have brought Jenny and Jalen to talk to you and do a little roundtable about what coaching has meant. Jenny Jones is an assistant principal at Champlain Park High School, and Jalen Giles is also a teacher at Champlain Park High School. And they're going to talk briefly about what coaching has meant for them.
Hello, I'm Jenny Jones. I'm one of the assistant principals at Champlain Park High School, and I had the privilege of working with our literacy coach, Miss Jody Baker, who's likely presenting to you right now. One of the shifts that I really saw with our social studies department was progress from that traditional model of working with packets, fill in the blank notes, encouraging students to be able to write, to think, to process, to analyze. Typically, in our past, sadly, a lot of uh, our teaching methods were about knowledge and recall in social studies specifically. And so I think the work with the literacy coach and the Circle Grant in totality really increased teachers' capacity to feel like they can do more with their students, and that realizing our students are capable of more as well. So I was so impressed with the progress that we made, even with teachers who we thought would be a little bit resistant to these requests. Lots of positive changes and just a much more equitable playing field in the subject area of social studies when it comes to the literacy strategies our teachers were implementing. We did have some people who felt like they were novice, and we did have people who already felt like they were doing this work. So Jody was really incredible at meeting people where they were at. And I think that was one of the major successes as well for this department, is that even when people were a little hesitant or a little concerned that they couldn't do it, having a great coach and having somebody who instills that motivation and assures you that you can get this done with our support is essential.
Working with the literacy coach has improved my teaching, I would say, and my thinking quite a bit. The thing that comes to mind the most, I think, is that permission to slow down. I think that so often things are procedural in the classroom. And you have one thing, you have the next thing, and you have a schedule to keep, especially in the social studies classroom. We are looking at a specific amount of time. We have to get to this date by this time, and the works. And I think that being able to slow down and say, okay, for this activity, I want us to analyze these two opposing political cartoons for the whole class. And it's not just going to be looking at them, but answering questions about them, thinking about them, maybe drawing your own, and analyzing them, but allowing that to be the lesson, and that can be just as effective. Analyzing a text, discussing that text, writing something, or synthesizing something connected to that text is way more powerful and way more student led than me just delivering info, right? And we can cover so many of those bases, and we can cover so many of these learning targets without ever having to open a Google slide presentation. And we can do it by taking our time. I don't have to create 6 different activities in a class period in order to be doing literacy. It's not so activity based that it's not manageable. It is manageable, it is interactive, and it is student led. And I think that's awesome. Working with the literacy coach has.
And here is Jeremy Parker, who's another coach in our district, talking about coaching.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Parker, and I am a literacy coach, and I support 2 separate high schools. And I come from it with a unique perspective of having been a social studies teacher in one of the departments that I support. What I noticed when I first started coaching is people were very dubious as to what a coach is. They had never had a literacy coach before. A lot of people assumed I was just simply a spy for admin, and I was coming into classrooms to see what they were doing and immediately go tell the main office what was happening. So I found it very limiting. And one thing that I came across is that because they knew me as a social studies teacher, everything was very content specific. They wanted me to be a consultant and help them with a lesson by saying, do you have any cool slides I could use for this? Do you have a reading for this? And there was really very little reflection on why things are effective and how they can evolve their practice. They were looking for me to hand them things, which was very limiting.
So moving into looking at research on literacy, we really have been reading literacy as connected with equity. That's the focus of the work we're doing. Research from Cantrell and Wheeler they found improved, even though literacy instruction has improved over the years, many students from diverse backgrounds still are not achieving and at high levels for literacy achievement. So, looking at culturally responsive literacy means looking beyond standard definitions and emphasizing the social worlds, the cultures, the identities, the language of the kids you're working with. Continuing with that idea, culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally reacting to students is one way, but also sustaining and centering students is a framework to honor children's language, their literacy, their cultures. And so we're looking at literacy in those lights. How are students already comprehending? How are students already understanding things? How are they already creating? So Shanahan's work is about disciplinary literacy and how it flows from the demands of the content. So we wanted teachers in social studies to realize they really are literacy teachers, and they're literacy teachers in looking at how do people who engage in social studies work engage in literacy. Cornelius Miner's work, and he says this all the time: if you're not doing equity, you're not doing literacy. So without equity, literacy really is incomplete. What we found with the coaches, if we supported teachers' intent that all students had access, that was a way to look at literacy. We also wanted to help them broaden their ideas of what literacy meant, which was something that we needed to do with all teachers. So asking teachers what they thought in our research. Here we go. How has our collaboration impacted your literacy instruction? And teachers said, having our coaches amazing, from teaching strategies to conversations to demos to resources. Never have experienced better literacy development. Again, that theme of this is the best PD I've had. The idea that they've evolved to actively engage students in their learning, to find ways to have them use and work with information to increase understanding. The idea of close reading is something that teachers really started understanding, that you go in and dig into a text and read it multiple times. And then a teacher said, implementing a few strategies across different classes, I saw how it succeeded or not, because it didn't always succeed. And then they could make adjustments. So next we're going to hear from Julie Scullin again about the literacy and equity connections.
Having this district literacy team has created an environment strongly focused on literacy in all buildings. We're no longer in a situation where each building is trying to do the work of equity and engagement single-handedly, or one where curriculum leaders are trying to bring about change in a system that only allows them to provide assistance to teachers 3 times a year. We have partners and we have a system in place to depend on, so we're not overwhelmed. The work is shared. Everyone from administrators to curriculum staff to teachers knows exactly what we're doing and why it's crucial. We all have the same why. Administrators know what effective literacy practices they're looking for when they visit classrooms. The work of the literacy team is now embedded in all that we do in professional development, in curriculum writing, in all of our district departments. We have a strong insight into the work that teachers are doing and the impact that it's having on students. We aren't just guessing and relying on anecdotal information. We know. Coaches are now integral in our professional development days. They can provide coaching and support to teachers after the PD, so the implementation is smooth and manageable. And those were all things I could not provide when I was single-handedly trying to lead literacy initiatives through our district. All in all, it makes my own work more focused, more manageable. I'm not just one person trying to ensure effective and equitable practices in literacy. I'm part of a team.
And we'll hear again from Jenny Jones, assistant principal at Champlain Park, about more equity and literacy connections.
So the impact of working on these evidence-based literacy practices has, I think, even the playing field for many of our students at Champlain Park High School. We have, of course, initially when we started this opportunity, we were working with our English and social studies teachers, and that in those core areas obviously are where we hit most of our students. However, we really knew that as an administrative team, this work was essential for all of our students and could easily be captured in any of our other classes. So we really tried to devote specific time at staff meetings and professional development opportunities where our literacy coach could have a bigger audience. And so that might mean something as small as modeling something at a staff meeting and asking staff to participate. That can mean something as large as a reflective PD, where we've had that on our professional development days, where our lit coach would walk people who chose to participate in this or are looking for a little bit more learning on evidence-based practices. It could be anything. And basically, we took the lead of the coach to know what she heard out amongst her peers, to know what people were asking for support with. And I think that was starting with two strong departments and then being able to allow them to share the work that they've done with their colleagues, and then also to be able to infuse that into our staff meetings and our professional development was probably one of our most major successes. That led us to then opening the doors to working with other departments. And so now we are working with the science department. All of our other departments are also welcome to access her support, but we are trying to emphasize that where we will hit the most students and make the largest impact.
Continuing on, we're going to look at research on equity. Again, that equity literacy connection, starting with Goldie Muhammad's work in her book, Cultivating Genius. She looks at historically responsive literacy. And historically, schools focus on white dominant culture. Culturally relevant framing of literacy means building in work around their identities and their literacies, that they're valued and that they're honored. Milner talks about equity in classrooms being sharing power, which is something that we talk a lot about when teachers have to let go. As a teacher, that's one of the things we coach into is how do you let go and still allow the work to be done. So looking at students' cultures as being assets and not deficits. Again, Cornelius Minor, and we've done book studies on Muhammad and Minor with our teachers. But relationships are grounded in shared vision and collaboration. This can apply to us as relationships with coaches and coachees, as well as teachers and students. So what we found is when coaches and teachers collaborated, there's more equitable resources that happen. Student-centered identities are there in their experiences. We created more spaces for critical literacy, which led to more equity. Power and oppression were more critiqued and understood, and multiple perspectives were available in the classroom. Again, those relationships, if the coachee and the coach built strong relationships, we found that moves into student-teacher relationships too. So asking teachers about how has this collaboration impacted your work with students? I worked with incorporating the OTQ method, one teacher said, which is an observe, think, question strategy, a thinking routine. Adding in thinking routines has been one way to really allow access for all students. So they're saying allowed me to give agency back to the students. Another teacher said I'm moving closer to 80-20, where students are talking more than me. That's huge. It's a huge shift. More intentional student-to-student interaction rather than teacher-to-student. And just directly to coaching, you've been incredibly helpful for me in talking through my ideas, directing me towards best practices and research-based strategies. So those EBPs became part of teachers' vernacular too.
And so now let's hear from a teacher. Jalen is back to talk about how literacy and equity connections affect her classroom.
Working with a literacy coach has really expanded my idea of what equity is. As an educator of color, equity is something that I am always considering. And if you would have asked me in my first year of teaching, I probably would have described to you equity as being a means of getting students closer to a specific standard and expectation that we have set for them as educators, right? But after doing literacy coaching, I think one, I was able to see just as a person of color and almost reflect into what I was like as a student of color. Um, and while I was working with the literacy coach, I was able to kind of go back and think, I don't have to change my ideas to fit in a certain format. Why should my students? This literacy coach is meeting me where I'm at, and we are working on things um, in the way that I'm comfortable. I like to draw ideas with arrows, and I'm not so much of a bullet pointed list type person. I am a little more type B, I think a little more chaotically. And I didn't have to be squished into a certain box in order to do lesson planning correctly when it came to um, literacy coach work and literacy work in my classroom. And so, why should my students? Why should I be, um, in order to do equity, putting them closer to this box or this framework that I've decided? Why wouldn't I open up the same opportunities that I've been opened up to through this literacy work as an educator? I want to offer that to my students, and so it's really opened up opportunity for smaller formative assessments and even larger assessments, um, and just feeling safe and comfortable doing that, and confident that learning is happening. And if I'm not exactly sure how to execute the learning, I know that I have that support system, and that is still a safe move for me to do and for me to experiment and for me to allow students to experiment and take the lead on different lessons and different activities that we do, um, because literacy is such a big umbrella, and um, it furthers equity along in so many ways.
So
Working with a
one of the
literacy coach has really
reasons that we wanted to come to KUFA is to present some data that we have. And I will say right off the bat that we have some really great data that shows the effectiveness of coaching. But we also know that we have areas of growth, and we'll mention them as well. But this is where a face-to-face conference would have been great, because we would have been able to have a back and forth and get feedback from you about other areas where we could elicit more data. So that's definitely something that we would love feedback from you as an audience with that. But we do have a lot of measurable data because this was a grant funded through the State Department of Education that got its money from the Federal Department of Education. There was lots of data that we had to collect in order to keep the grant going. And in addition to that, since the grant ended, we needed to create more data to justify to our school board that the coaching positions should receive a full-time equivalency in FTE in each building. So some of the data that we have relied on is coaching logs, walkthroughs, and teacher surveys that exist. So in our walkthrough data, what we would do, the teaching and learning specialists would walk through with a coach or an administrator and pop into buildings for 5 or 10 minutes at a time in each different classroom and see what was going on. We would have our iPads with us, and we'd mark down observable EBPs that we referenced earlier. So in our first year of, and this is pre-COVID, but in our first year of coaching, we saw classroom practices double, where all students were actively reading from a text, which we all know social studies teachers who like to talk, the fact that it is the students who are reading from a text. That's awesome. Students writing in response to a text with high level thinking. We saw a quintuplet of student choice in reading materials. And text rather than the teacher talking at students were some of the ways in which classroom pedagogy was changed. The whole idea of the Circle Grant was to get teachers to change their practice to empower students. And that empowerment has led to data that is quite impressive. All of our high schools with literacy coaches saw increased scores in their MCAs, which is Minnesota's reading test. We even saw that in our COVID years, which in all the years where data goes down, we saw increases in our reading scores. The number of texts, or just text period, checked out in our library circulation went up by 40%. We have district finals in our common summative assessments. We had a gap between our white students and our BIPOC students, and that was reduced by 8.6% because of the equity work. And one social studies teacher has said there were students who interact and shared that hadn't been sharing or participating all year. So we have a bunch of data. It helps guide our work. And again, Julie Scullin will talk about what that role of data is.
Data has changed how we plan professional development in the sense that we no longer have to guess or infer what our teachers need. We can see it in our data. Sometimes, as a teacher, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't always have time to investigate new and engaging practices. So the data that we've collected, our walkthrough data, and some other things, those scores give us strong insight into where we're showing growth and what areas need revisiting.
And because of this data, even after the grant, we continue to have coaches, and our boss will talk about how that funding has come about.
The biggest challenge was funding the coaching positions. We decided to offer each of our 5 high schools a .5 coaching position paid for out of our district professional development budget. Buildings could choose to find an additional .5 to make the coach full-time at one site, and several of our sites chose this option. Other principals got creative by combining the .5 offered by the district for coaching with an existing .5 teaching position. This wasn't ideal from a scheduling point of view, but it did keep the coach in the building. We also combined 2.5 positions to a 1.0 coach shared by 2 different buildings. Again, this was a challenge, but gains were still made by both sites. So it really has been dependent on the creativity of the principals. But clearly the fact that principals have risen to the challenge and have been giving up their own FTE, I think speaks volumes to the success of the grant and the program. The biggest challenge was funding.
And we still have areas of growth, and Jeremy Parker, one of the literacy coaches, will explain some of those.
There are definitely misconceptions about what a literacy coach does, and people think that I just simply want teachers to infuse articles and have students read more. And why, yes, that is a part of it. A lot of teachers don't think about having students write. And write to think, write to process, not just simply write to take notes that I'm copying off the board. Also, teachers, and I love making fun of them for this, they love to start off a class by saying, yesterday in class we talked about ... And my question is, well, who's actually doing the talking? It's typically a teacher lecturing and asking right or wrong answers to students, and they raising their hands and providing answers. But having student to student communication in a meaningful way is something that a lot of teachers don't view a literacy coach as a person who can help facilitate. There are definitely misconceptions.
And we'll hear from Jenny Jones again. I have the privilege of having Jenny as my assistant principal. She's going to talk about how the role of coaching, she has maintained that it was a sacred role, and the support provided by admin and how important that is.
So excited to see where it continues. It's a value to us, so it's something that we continue to keep sacred and try to keep the coach solely focused on coaching. And so that can be really challenging because there are a lot of other responsibilities that need to happen in a high school. And immediately you think of staff who maybe do not have a direct role servicing students, but we have really tried to make this role sacred for our coach. And I think in doing so, that has really helped us continue the work. So excited to see.
So, a few final thoughts as we wrap things up, and appreciate you joining us. We just wanted to point out a few things that stood out for us. For me, as coach, relationships are key. I'm now in the science department after having been housed in the English department and the social studies department. So I'm kind of starting over. And the number one thing I'm doing is building relationships before teachers will trust me to collaborate with them. They have to know who I am. Bless you, and know that we can work together. And I'm not evaluating them. That was something we said over and over and over again. We're not here to evaluate. We're here to collaborate with you, which can be kind of suspect because usually when someone comes in your room, they're there evaluating you. So that is a really big thing. And I think also helping teachers expand their idea of what literacy is. We've done a lot of work around asking teachers to define for themselves what literacy is. And we continue to redefine what literacy is. I try to pass along to teachers one of the things I think about is literacy is about comprehending in whatever discipline you're in, and then it's about critiquing, and then it's about creating. And so I boil it down to that sometimes for teachers. So, how are your kids actually comprehending and critiquing and creating?
And for me, having been in the classrooms and stopping in and seeing what teachers are doing in this post COVID world, it's very clear that they are nervous and they have so much on their plate. And they're falling back on things that they've traditionally done pre coaching and pre thinking about the strategies, the effects, and all the things that we've tried to build in our professional development since the grant has started. And so, really, we're trying to keep that shift to be instead of adding on literacy, like, yep, it's great that you're doing a 17-word summary after you lecture at kids for a half an hour. You're getting them to think. That's better than doing nothing. But how are you changing your practice? So you might not need to lecture for that 30 minutes or that 67 minutes. Or if you do, that's only happening sporadically. You're actually starting with, as that teacher said earlier, 80% of the time it's the students who are doing the work, and 20% of the time it's you as a teacher doing that work. So infusing is great, but really centering literacy. And in social studies, we have such broad text from our textbook to speeches and pictures and all the different text and media that we have at our disposal. Why aren't we leading with that and making that the case? So we have a lot of really great things that we can build off of going forward, knowing that we still have a lot of work, especially in writing and discussing. And in post-COVID times where our students are 2 grades behind academically, socially, getting them back in that routine. Those are areas of growth that we're using our team and our structure in place to try to change that teacher behavior, which will, in effect, hopefully trickle down to student higher achievement.
One of the things we keep doing is reflecting and come and circling back to how things are changing and how coaching is an ebb and flow, and it can be like that from a day-to-day basis to a week-to-week basis. So I've just included a couple of my coaching reflections from looking at my coaching logs over the years. I would stop every once in a while and just reflect on it. And one of the things that stood out to me in this one, which was early on, and it was the second year, but how the beginning of the year was completely different from the first year. The first year, I was dropping into classrooms and kind of trying to create work for myself because I was trying to figure out what my job was, and so was everybody else. And by the second year, I was working really hard with teachers, one on one, barely having time to fit things in. And so at the end, I had written, I've worked with all 38 teachers in 20 days of school, and that's my rose with elements of thorn in it because it was all of a sudden I was almost overwhelmed with too much. So just knowing that this kind of work ebbs and flows, I think, is an important thing. And then looking at how teachers' capacity and agency has changed. We've been talking to you today about the power for students in this, but we have to empower teachers too. So the fact that we can, as coaches, empower their work, and not that we're giving them the power, but we're alongside them, I think is really important. And finally, kind of looking at, again, teachers telling me you are the best teaching resource I've ever had is one of the things that just keeps me going. That this is actually something I can do to differentiate for teachers and to work with them one on one in ways that meet what they need, not what somebody has planned for them ahead of time, but what we literally sit down and it's what do you need right now, today? And guess what? I can still here tomorrow. And so we're going to keep this work going.
And this is a great quote from an expert teacher who leads tons of professional development, has been teaching for 20 years. This is what she said in working with the coach. Working with my literacy coach has helped me step outside my traditional literacy practices to try new things that are more engaging and based on inclusion of all learners. This has given me new resources in which I can draw on, share with others, and most importantly, has helped me achieve a higher level of equitable practices for all learners in my room. And we're seeing that when we go. And this is why we do our work. It's for the students and what is there. So thank you for watching. By all means, send us an email. We'd love to collaborate and talk with you about our literacy team and coaching.
Thank you.
And here are our resources. But those are cool. You can pause and take a look at this, but here again is our emails. Have a great day. Thanks for
Thank
watching.
you.